what should a buyer do if the property that they're purchasing under appraises?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. We don't control the appraisal process. There are stipulated provisions within the loan process where a third party, objective party, comes out and puts a valuation on an individual property. Are appraisers perfect? No. But appraisers do wield a significant threshold, significant impact on the transaction. Bottom line, if the property does not appraise out, the transaction's in jeopardy. There's different ways to address a low appraisal on a property. One way of doing that might be to submit some comparison properties and ask for a review of that appraisal. Unfortunately, most of the time, attempts at changing the appraisal are difficult to put through unless there's blatant mistakes that were made along the way. Oftentimes, the appraiser will be clued in. They will be looking at a specific neighborhood and following their criteria, which often, again, is 1 mile radius of the property, and typically would be with transactions that have closed within the last 6 months. But there could be some uniqueness to a given property, to a given locale that the appraiser may not be able to recognize. And if that's taken into account in the appraisal process, then sometimes you just chalk it up to that's the way it goes. Let's look at two scenarios there, Gino. One might be an FHA transaction. So if you had an FHA transaction, and I have had these happen before, and you ultimately have an appraisal that comes in, that FHA appraisal is going to be in place for the next 6 months. So it's not going to be able to be renegotiated. You're not going to get a second crack at coming back in and and working through a different pricing level until you wait the 6-month period of time. Why is that significant? That's very important because if you happen to be in a marketplace that a significant portion of that market happens to be government financing, FHA financing, you might find yourself with a lower appraisal in a position that now you've restricted chances to sell that property. So you'd want to explain that to the seller, let the seller know that, and then possibly seek an accord. What can be done on the buyer side? Options for the buyer could be ask the buyer to come up with the difference in the down payment. So that would be now if it's $10,000 short, say on an appraisal, they may have to come up with some extra down payment if they like the house enough, and if they have the financial availability to do that, that's a possibility. Sometimes there can be a negotiation between the buyer and the seller. So the seller may agree to reduce the price of the property by a certain amount, and the buyer might meet and say, well, we'll increase our down payment by a certain amount. Again, this goes back to the buyer's availability to be able to do that. If they don't have the cash, then there's a lot of limitations there as to really what you can do with the lower appraisal. Seller could also concede completely. Seller could say, well, if it's $10,000 light on the price, I really want to sell this property, and they could agree to the lower appraisal, and then it would be at whatever the loan amount would be for the appraised value. So those are some different scenarios that could apply on an FHA transaction. On the flip side, if it was a conventional transaction, same scenario that you created, and the conventional appraiser comes in and appraises it for $10,000 less than the purchase price, you're not restricted to go back and try another lender. So you could suggest to the buyer's agent, hey, we think we got a low appraisal on this one. I've had this happen many, many times. Let's go try another lender. We'll give you some more time. We'll have you take another shot at it. There's going to be some additional expenses that are going to be accrued on it because you'll have a second appraisal cost. Sometimes the sellers could contribute to that cost. It's a negotiable item like anything else. And you could take another crack at another lender on it. Typically, you can take a look also at the comps that were used by the appraiser. So if you find some glaring mistakes along the way, why the comparables that they used were not pertinent or were not well placed, or if you have some new ones that have come in that interim period since the time the appraisal was completed, that again might be fair game for a future review, and hopefully you'd be able to put your transaction back together again at that point.